Okay then, so I can see lots of answers A. So yeah, effective assessment should serve multiple purposes. Okay, so what about for the second one? So misconceptions are, which of these do you think it is? So again, in chat, if you can add in what you think the answer is. Yeah, okay, so again, we can see lots of C's. So misconceptions are the views or beliefs that can conflict with the content that pupils are learning about. So some examples of misconceptions may be pupils in science thinking that all bacteria is bad, or in geography, you might have this misconception that Africa is a country, not a continent. So hopefully through assessment, we'll be able to reveal some of those misconceptions. Okay, and then finally, we've got question 3. Which of the following may make feedback less effective? So again, in chat, if you can add in your answers. Okay, so there's a little bit of a mix of answers here. So the question is, which of the following may make feedback less effective? And actually the correct answer is C. So feedback directed at a personal level is likely to reduce performance. So if it's provided alongside other feedback, it's likely to be distracting. Okay, so it's not A, because linking 2 levels of feedback is likely to be effective, as it helps pupils to apply feedback to the current task and to future tasks. Okay then, so just moving on, we're just going to go through what principles we're going to be focusing on in this session today. So just a little bit of a reminder, if you can just have a read through of the screen again, just a couple of seconds. Okay, so module principles are taken from all of the statements and we condense them down into a helpful way to help you to potentially make more effective decisions. So the idea is that they're phrased to be more memorable for you. Okay, so the one which we've got as an example on there is opportunity cost. That's one of the module principles on the assessment course, the course which you've just been completing. Okay, so it's generated from the framework statements that you can see on the slide. Okay, and then the idea then is that it's a way for you as leaders or future leaders to think about assessment that can be applied across different situations and contexts. So it might look a little bit different when applied in different situations and concepts, but it's still a helpful rule of thumb and therefore worthwhile learning. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're just going to have a little look at which principles we're going to be focusing on during this clinic. Okay, so if you can get your handbooks, then in that it's actually got the different types of principles that we've been looking at. And if you remember last time we did this where we were thinking about what are the ones that you have been focusing on and how have you done that? How have you applied it? And thinking a little bit more about what other reading you might have done during your study. So maybe some of the tasks which you've done, maybe some of the further reading, or maybe how you've applied that in the context. Okay, so we're not going to do this in partners, as it says there. I'd just like you to think a little bit about it. And then similar to what we did last time, I'm going to ask some of you to share what you've been doing. Okay, so just a couple of minutes for you to have a little think. And then I'll ask some people if they'd like to share. Okay then, so I am willing to do some cold calling, but I'd like to have some volunteers first. So is there anybody who'd like to share which you focused on, why, and perhaps how you've done that? Okay, I think I'll have to cold call then. So Leon Rowland, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what you've been focusing on and how you've done that?
Yeah, so I work across various my injury, mainstream and stuff 12 months ago. It's my source to my teacher or the students. This then to 5, 6 hours to ask needs small classes. So I found that quite kits means that I really to conception sort of really.
Sorry, Leon, that was a little bit broken up for me. I don't know whether it was for anybody else.
I think we seem to be getting a bit of background noise then. Maybe
can everyone hear me okay?
I'll move on.
Yeah, it's okay. I didn't know if it was me or if it was just
no, I think we're all getting the same.
Somebody else. All right, okay, that's fine.
Someone's internet connection, I think.
Okay, how about Jenny Jones? Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, so some of my tasks that I selected were more about reading up. So reading stuff from the Education Endowment Foundation, looking at delivering appropriately timed feedback and discussing it with our early years team, especially like how we use feedback within provision and within like focused tasks and how we could improve that. So we've looked at how we can move learning on in terms of having challenges within our provision and reception, and starting to think about how we can do the same in our nursery setting as well. So it's just mostly been looking at our feedback and then we've been looking at our marking policy as well as in our early years meetings and thinking about how, especially with us, because it's mostly verbal, how we can, deliver feedback at the point of learning for them as well, just so it's how we can just move these younger children on, really.
Yeah, that sounds great. And particularly that sort of in the moment feedback as well. I think, that's something which what we've been discussing or what we will be discussing will bring up some ideas for as well. Okay, then, so just moving on. So we're going to just clarify which module principles we're going to focus on in this clinic, because as we've said, we can't cover everything, unfortunately. So what we're going to be looking at particularly today is for the module decision-driven data collection, looking at purposeful and looking at decision-driven. And then for feedback, we're going to particularly look at relationship sensitive and opportunity cost. So what we're going to be doing now, we're going to do an I do section, which will then allow us to have a look at these in that little bit more depth and see some ideas of how it might be applied. So I'm going to be handing over to Jay now, who will start to take us through that I do section.
Hello everyone. So we are going to do the I do section, as Faye has just pointed out. In this section, this will take a fictional example, and I think that's important to know. However, it is totally feasible that this could be a scenario, a situation that you might find within your school. It could be a high school setting, it could be a primary setting. Both are very transferable in terms of your phases, and the situation itself can be applicable in lots of ways. So don't feel if it's not your phase that it's not applicable to you in any way. I do refers to me as a facilitator. I'm going to model how we're going to go through these principles and the best way of thinking to adopt these changes. And we might throw some additional knowledge or information or even some contextual things that both Andy, Faye and myself have done in our settings and apply it to those module principles as well. The first thing we're going to do is have a read of this first scenario. So have a little recap of the module principles that we're going to be focusing on today that Faye's highlighted. That's on page 6 of your document. Then on page 7 is the first scenario. Any information in bold will just draw your attention to any of the module principles or language that you've looked at within your course already. As you read it, first time through, I will just read it all the way through nice and clearly, no annotations, just go for it, give it a good read. If you get a chance to finish, go back through, annotate, highlight anything you'd like to do to link it to those module principles, and have a quick look at the question as well if you do finish early, that will be really, really useful for the next part. So I'm just going to give you about 5 minutes to give a quick read through of those module principles again and a read through of that first scenario, and we'll come back in 5 minutes ready for the next part of the I do section. Thanks everyone. Hi Laura, I've just seen your chat message. It's page 6 for the module principles and it's page 7 for the first scenario. Okay, everyone, just about another 20 seconds just to bring that to a close. Now, in this section, how it's going to work is that myself, Andy, and Faye, we're going to be bouncing some ideas across in terms of how we would approach the decision-making of this leader. So we're going to really respond to the questions that you can see on your screen now. So what's effective about that leader? And then what suggestions might we add as well? We will share some contextual links that we have with our own schools, just to further enrich this part of the I do section. So firstly, let's look at the principle of purposeful. For me, I think that the head of science here has been quite purposeful in their thinking. They've really thought about the impact that assessment could have. I think it's really important that assessment isn't just this collection of scores, but it's actually being used to support children's learning, and there's justification for a decision. I think very often assessment is done too often to a point where some of the learning is lost. The head of science has a really clear intent here. They are triangulating information from people's books, people and staff discussion, drop-in sessions in lessons. And I think because they've got this really well-rounded view, it's incredibly purposeful in what they're doing in terms of how is the assessment going to support the effective feedback within those lessons. Andy, do you have any suggestions here around, in your context or other things too, around being purposeful?
Yeah, I think what jumps out for me is, tests, if we're looking at assessment, sometimes what is always known as assessment, but there's other ways of doing it. There's two forms, as you learn about, and tests only a very small part of that. There's that age-old analogy of weighing a pig doesn't make it any heavier, and I think sometimes we have to reflect, and I know we've done that at our school, that sometimes if we continue testing pupils, actually we're just getting the same information out. And as you've said, it's got to be purposeful, that we've got to use the assessment to do something with. We've developed an example in our foundation subjects where we've used technology to support our assessments. So children do similar to the example there, these short little quizzes at the end of each unit of learning. They're self-marked because it is technology, and teachers get get the information really clearly, really quickly about who is at the expected standard there, who's doing really well, who's making good progress, but also who needs that extra support, so it can be put in place really, really quickly. Okay. Anything else to add on that one, Jay?
No, I think that's a really good thing there, because I think you can test too much, but if you're not getting anything out of it, there is no point. It's as simple as that.
Perfect. I'm going to move on to decision-driven. This is orientated on what decisions the assessment is tended to inform, not the data that needs collecting. It kind of builds on what I've just said. There's only point doing the assessment if we have an outcome and we do something with it. The score is sometimes not good enough. In this example, the teachers must use information from the assessments to inform the decisions they make. And that's by using the assessment task to help teachers decide whether to reteach or move on. The head of science was applying the module principle of decision driven. He was using different forms of data as well. He was looking at books, he was talking to different members of staff as well, and was getting a real big picture of what was happening in the science department. And then later on as well, he did a small scale little trial as well. Instead of just going gung-ho, we're all doing it, he brought it back together and thought, you know what, we're just going to trial it, and took some of that workload element out. As it goes on, making this decision did not require teachers to record any data from their assessment tasks, so the head of science did not ask them to do so. Working collaboratively, and again, he used some of that time in staff CPD to create these assessments. It used the subject expertise of other members of staff, especially if it's a new teacher who's doing this. Is there anything you'd like to add on this, Faye or Jay?
No, I think it echoes back to the last one, doesn't it, around decision. It's effective decision making, and that ultimately leads to something being purposeful. I think they both go hand in hand, these principles. Yeah,
they link very closely, don't they? But they are under the same umbrella. I think that's why they are so closely linked. Perfect. We'll move on to Faye.
Okay then, so this one's particularly looking at opportunity cost, and it's based on this idea that actually assessment can become onerous and impacts disproportionately on workload. We've all been there. We've all, you know, sort of been floundering underneath this sort of mountain of assessments. But becoming aware of this enabled this head of science to use this module principle of opportunity cost. They weighed up the potential impact on the pupil achievement and potential impact on workload. And they decided that both are significant. They identified that providing written feedback for other tasks was workload intensive, but was actually having less impact on attainment. So they stopped doing it. Implementing the new strategy was judged worth the opportunity lost from stopping the other written feedback. So by collaborating as a team, the head of science was able to increase the efficiency of this strategy. And I think this is particularly important, is to look and do that balancing act of, you know, where are we getting the gains? Is it coming from the feedback? If it is, will you spend the time on the feedback? If it's not, then what other way can you, you know, allow pupils to progress? And this is something which we've considered a lot in our school at the moment, where we've looked at our marking policies. And I don't know if it's the same in your schools, but this particularly came about during lockdown, when actually we weren't allowed to mark pupils' books, or if we did, we had to leave them to one side for a certain length of time before we were then allowed to pick them up. And that made us reconsider completely how we mark and where actually pupils were getting the most amount of gains from their marking. Jay, Andy, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think something that builds into this, like you say, is those gains. And I think looking at not just education, but around other sectors, you know, whether that's in sport, with the private sector. And, you know, I, for one, listen to a lot of podcasts on performance. And one of my favorites, High Performance, those that listen, I'd really recommend. And a lot of, you know, the sports teams and high performing companies are always having that single aim. The example one I listened to recently was on Team Sky, when they were Team Sky for the cycling, and they were all working to that one goal of making that bike that little bit faster. And if they did something that didn't make it faster, they didn't do it. And it's like you've said, making sure that whatever we're doing is really purposeful and having a positive impact on the pupils. And if it's not, we sometimes need to take a step back and just not change it straight away, but reflect, respond, discuss, and see if we can make it more beneficial for them, because we don't want to waste our time or our team around us. We want to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, so moving on to the next one then. This is one which I feel is often forgotten about, and it's that relationship sensitive. So teachers should be aware of the important role that emotions can play when responding to feedback. So in this particular example, speaking to colleagues and pupils and observing lessons made it clear that the planning for this feedback strategy had not considered that effective feedback is dependent on positive relationships. So the strategy, as in a sense, it does not apply to this module principle of relationship sensitive. So by coding feedback as red, amber or green, actually the teachers were inadvertently telling pupils that they were making a judgment about their attainment, rather than actually supporting them on how to improve. So this meant the pupils were perceiving the feedback as sort of being targeted personally rather than at their work. And research shows that this is less likely to be effective. So giving pupils a score also has a very similar effect, because again, it's about teachers focusing on the pupil rather than on how they can improve. So thinking about what this head of science could have done, maybe sort of planning with staff how to introduce a strategy to reinforce that teachers had the pupils' best interests at heart, and reinforcing that with the pupils. And also making it difficult for pupils to compare their performance. So actually maybe having a range of colours, or certainly colours that aren't necessarily associated, you know, sort of red being particularly negative, or by potentially not giving scores. Now, again, within my school, one of the things which we did a lot before we adapted our marking policy was we would go through a pupil's piece of work and use highlighters, yellow for good things, orange for things that needed improving. And this was done with good intentions, but actually, if a pupil was to receive a piece of work back and it's, you know, sort of covered in orange highlighter, that's perhaps sending out a message which is going to have an impact on their emotions. Anybody has anything to add there, Jay or Andy?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when I was reflecting on this at Gorsfield, we use a green, amber, and red marking policy, but it's designed to be really simple. I think what's different in our context as to the context we've read is that our relationship with our children and our families and our community is incredibly strong. And we have a mantra at Gorsfield that we're all learners and we're all leaders, and that culture feeds into everything that we do. So if a child receives a piece of work that is marked as amber, we might offer in our marking some scaffolded support or scaffolded sentences, or maths, we might scaffold a method or something like that, just to point children in the right direction. For children that have a red, that is the opportunity for them to work with the teacher closer to forge that even stronger relationship, that learner-teacher relationship. And as a result of that, our children make good progress because they know where they stand. And if they get a red or an amber in their marking, they know that's an opportunity to improve on in the future. Similarly, for children with green, it's that I've done it, but that's not enough. Where are we going to push them to the next level? How can we extend their thinking through questioning even further? So it's interesting that we similar approaches, however, the culture around it and the conversations and the clarity we have with children around, if you get that, it's not the end of the world, we're going to do something about it. I think that's the key point to this part of the of relationship sensitive. It's knowing your children and being really clear about how you can support them.
Yeah, and I think that was flagged up in the example where, you know, it says that you have to plan with staff how you're going to introduce this and how then you are going to, in a sense, reinforce that with the pupils in terms of what are the intentions.
Brilliant. And over to Jay to close this section.
Lovely. So we've got a little opportunity now just to have any questions or reflections on anything that we've talked about from the I do section. So it could be the way that we've applied the principles to the scenarios, anything that you might agree or disagree with. We're not easily offended, which is good. So do question, because that's part of your learning process. And also just any of the content that we have covered, anything we've said, any links to our context. If you want to find out more about what Faye, Andy and I do, you're more than welcome to reflect now. So I'll open up to any volunteers for at least 30 seconds. If anybody wanted to ask anything or share anything or even pop it in the chat, that would be great.
Jay, I was going to say, because obviously we both work at Gorsfield,
Yeah.
with our red, amber, green, our children feedback their work as well. So because we've got those strong relationships, they might put amber on their work and reflect on their work before the teacher even comes round to mark. So I feel like our children have also, they don't see it as a negative thing if they struggle, they straight away put that colour on to have those conversations with children, to have that conversation with the teacher as well and with their friends. So I do feel we've got that culture where they feel okay to rag their own work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's absolute transparency, isn't there, Jenny, between the children and staff?
Yeah.
And children are, you know, very, very clear and vocal if they don't get something. Children aren't really passive learners at Gorsfield. They don't just sit back and hide. They'll be the first ones to tell you if they don't get something and want that further support. I'd love to give everyone like a quick fix on how we do that. I think that's something that takes a long time to develop, and we always talk about culture taking 7 years to fully embed. And it's something that is really embedded now, but I think it's been a long, hard battle to get to the point where with our children today. But there's absolute transparency. Children know where they're at, and they're not offended if you give them a red. They're like, right, what do I need to do? And like I mentioned, it's that close relationship with teachers. Our teachers, the nature of our school, we have quite a challenging area. And I think because we have the strong community links, the strong links with our children, and those relationships are so, they're impeccably strong in a way. I think children just hang on your every word and just want that support. And both ways, we learn off our children just as much. No, thank you, Jenny. I think that was a good addition. One thing I didn't add there that we do really effectively as well. Did anyone have any other reflections or questions on that section?
We've got Jasmine with her hand up. Oh, just not mean to.
Oh, sorry, I'm on my iPad and I was trying to read the chat and I've obviously just caught it. Sorry.
No,
That's all right.
not a problem at all.
Sorry.
That's okay, everybody. I think we'll leave our reflections there. However, we are about to go into a little 10-minute break before we jump into the We Do section. If you do have any questions or anything like that over those 10 minutes, often when you go and make yourself a quick brew or grab a drink, you'll think of something. Do feel free to drop a message. It's really appreciated.
I think, Jay, because we're doing quite well, I think we make it 5 minutes if that's okay, and we come back about
Perfect.
1:45. So yeah, 4.5 you've got, and then we'll kick back the next section at 1:45. Again, we'll be here if you've got any questions, but we'll see you in around 4 minutes now, 1:45 for the second part, which is the We Do section. Cheers, everyone.
Well, thank you.
Okay, everyone, we'll move on to the final part of this evening's clinic, the biggest section, which is the we do section. Okay, let's have a look what this means. So in this section, we will look at another similar scenario. This on the next page is in your workbook. Although the scenario might seem different on the surface, it demonstrates the leader's decision making around the same module principles. And you'll see again, it's a different phase as well. So building on what Jay said, same principles, different phases and contexts. So on the slide, you will see how the we do section is split up into the 4 different parts. In a moment, you'll have 10 minutes to read and record your analysis of scenario 2 independently. You should take the same approach that we took in the I do section. Note that there is another question for you to consider if you finish analysing within the time. This question has been chosen to encourage you to think about more context in which these module principles can apply. By doing this, you will develop your mental models of ways in which these principles can be used in different decision-making scenarios. Okay, we've got 10 minutes to read and analyse. The workbook, again, we put in the chat before, and we'll come back in around 10 minutes. You can turn your cameras off at this point as well, if you'd like.
Excuse me, sorry, Joe and Leanne, we lost connection, so we're not quite sure which scenario we're reading, because obviously we want to do the right thing. If you could just point us in the right direction, please. Not got the best internet here at Edgerton.
Yeah, it's in the hills, isn't it? No, not a problem.
Yeah.
It's scenario 2. I'm just pulling up the
Scenario 2.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so it starts at page 9, the we do section,
Page
and
9,
scenario is
right.
on page 10.
All right.
Okay, over to Jay.
Okay, everybody. So from this point on now, we're going to have about 10 minutes to share any of those reflections and answer to the first question that you've following reading that second scenario. And you'll have a little chance with a small breakout room, with a small group in order to do so. Do really pay attention to any areas of uncertainty, anything to agree on or disagree on. That links right back to the ambition principles of being kind and being present. So if you do disagree, don't flail around too much on your camera. Make sure you just offer suggestions or other ways that you might want to look at the issues raised within that scenario. Also, don't be worried if Andy, myself or Faye drop into any of your rooms. Just pretend that we're not there and just continue those discussions. We just want to see what the groups are saying, what kind of suggestions you have already, and we'll use that to steer any of around any misconceptions later on in the session. So if you do see us, don't panic and don't whack all yourselves on mute. We're just there just to see what's going on. Okay, everybody. So we're going to set you into breakout rooms. So Andy's going to fire them across now.
I'm nearly there.
Yeah, I always lose it where it is on the screen.
Yeah, I'm on split screen here, so that's why I'm okay. Well, we should open now. We should go into the breakout room.
Lovely. 10 minutes, everybody. That's all it will be.
Okay, everyone's in, bar Leon.
I think Leon's got 2 accounts. I've noticed his name twice, so I think it's.
Oh, was he right?
So this must be the account that he's
not.
Oh,
he is. Yeah, it's gone. Perfect.
Those quiz answers were wrong again on the facilitator notes.
No.
In fact, the first question was completely different on the facilitator notes to what it actually had. And that's what happened last time. It serves me right for not checking it properly.